begin with the objectives of the lesson.
Define risk. Describe the key concepts and tailoring considerations in project risk management. Learn how to calculate risk. Identify different categories of risk. And describe project risk management processes. Risk and risk management.
All projects are risky because they're unique undertakings with varying degrees of complexity that are influenced by constraints and assumptions and the often changing expectations of stakeholders. Organizations need to manage project risks in a controlled and intentional manner in order to create value while balancing risk and reward. The PMI definition of risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more of a project's objectives. You're managing a gas pipeline expansion project in Canada. However, the project funds are allocated in US dollars, although most of the expenses are in Canadian dollars. Exchange rate fluctuations are a risk to the project budget. Shortly after the project starts, the Canadian dollar depreciates significantly, resulting in a budget surplus. This is an example of a positive risk. Another one is if a major storm delays construction of a commercial office tower, the project timelines may be delayed. This is an example of a negative risk. Now that we have some context on risk types, let's look at risk responses, starting with positive risks next.
Risks exist at two levels within every project. Individual project risks, which are an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has either a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives, and overall project risk, which is the effect of uncertainty on the project as a whole, arising from all sources of uncertainty, including individual risks, representing the exposure of stakeholders to the implications of variations in both positive and negative risks. Some of the evolving trends in project risk management include non-event risks. There are two main types of non-event risks. Variability risk, which is uncertainty that exists about some key characteristics of a planned event or activity or decision. Examples include over or under productivity, higher or lower defects, and unseasonable weather conditions. And ambiguity risk. Uncertainty exists about what might happen in the future. There's imperfect knowledge in certain areas of the project, such as elements of technical solution design, future developments in regulatory frameworks, and inherent complexity, which might affect achieving the project objectives. There is also project resilience. Emergent risks can be tackled through developing project resilience. This requires each project to have the right level of budget and schedule contingency reserve for each known risk. Flexible project processes. Project team empowerment with agreed limits, and clear input from stakeholders so that strategy can be adjusted to respond to any emergent risks. And finally, integrated risk management. Program-level risks will be delegated to the project team, and project-level risks will be escalated to higher levels. Considerations for tailoring the way project risk management processes are applied include project size. Risk processes are used based on the size of budget, duration, scope, and the team size. Project complexity. A robust risk approach is needed when the project calls for innovation or leveraging new technology. Project importance. The level of risk for the project increases when there are breakthrough opportunities, and the development approach. For waterfall projects, risk processes can be sequential and iterative. For Agile, at the start of every iteration and during execution, risks should be assessed. In these environments, frequent reviews of incremental work products and cross-functional project teams must be done to effectively manage risks. Risk identification, analysis, and management are done during each iteration of the review. Work may be reprioritized based on an understanding of the risk exposure.
The following terms are referenced extensively in the risk management knowledge area, so take some time to review these and feel comfortable with what they mean. Negative risks are known as threats, and positive risks are known as opportunities. A risk that can only have a negative consequence is called a pure risk. A risk that can have a positive or negative consequence is called a business risk. Risk averse. Someone who does not take risks is called risk averse. In the next screen, we'll understand how risk is calculated. Risks can be managed only if they are measured quantitatively. Suppose there are many risks identified in a project, and you have limited resources to manage them. You should know which risk is most important that has to be managed first. Therefore, measuring risk becomes very critical. Risk is measured by assigning a monetary value to it, and that value is arrived at by multiplying the probability and impact of the risk, where risk probability is the likelihood that a risk event could happen, and risk impact is the effect on the project objectives if a risk event happens. In the next screen, let's look at an example for calculating risk. Risks can be quantified, and this is an important activity to determine how to respond to risks. Let's look at the example below. Calculate the total expected monetary value, or EMV, for the 3 work packages given their probability and impact. Now let's look at package X. The value of the risk is 25% of the impact. So $10,000, 25% is $2,500. The expected monetary value, or EMV, of the risk is sometimes called the exposure to the risk. The impact where the value is negative is called a threat, and the impact where the value is positive is called an opportunity. Now calculate the expected monetary value of risk for the next 2 packages. Also, determine the overall EMV for a project by analyzing all the identified risks and adding them up. Now in this example, if all the risks materialize, then there is a threat of $1,300 to the project. Okay, in the next screen, let's learn more about risk categorization. Risks can be categorized in various ways. One such categorization is external, internal, technical, or project management related risks. External risk arrives out of external policies or regulations. For example, government policies that the river water can be used for drinking purposes may hinder your production, which is dependent on using the river water. Internal risks arise from within the project. For example, the complexity of the work may result in time and cost escalations. Technical risks arrive from the technology being used. Projects in space exploration have a lot of technical complexity. Risks could be related to project management. For example, if there are many interdependencies between the subprojects, it's a risk from the project management standpoint. The categorization of risk can be based on the origin. Risk can be classified as scope risk, resource risk, schedule risk, cost risk, and quality risk. Scope risk can include redoing the same task if the scope is not well understood. When the only resource is assigned to some other project, that would be a resource risk. In the next screen, let's discuss the decision tree that will help us estimate risk. A decision tree helps in analyzing risk and its impact on taking decisions in a scenario where there is uncertainty on the outcome. Suppose you want to buy a car. You can buy either a new car or an old car. Which one should you buy? Which has more risk over a period of 5 years? Consider the concept of a decision tree to solve this problem. The initial cost of buying a new car is $20,000, and the cost of buying the old car is $15,000. For a new car, the probability of it having any problems or a fail scenario is only 10%, which means there's a 90% likelihood that it will work without any problems, which is considered the pass scenario. If it does have a problem, then the impact is determined to be $15,000. An old car has a 70% probability of having a problem. Since the car is older, it's reasonable to expect it to have a higher risk of having a problem. However, since the cost of the car is lower, the impact here is also lower. Let's say it's $10,000. If you add the probability multiplied by the impact of both the options at the decision nodes, you'll find that buying an old car over a period more risky than buying a new car. Now on the next screen, let's discuss risk reserve. The project costs will be arrived at after considering the risk reserves of both the known risks and the unknown risks. There's a specific order in which these reserves are calculated in the project cost. First, the cost of all activities is identified. Activities are the smallest, unique project tasks at the work package level. All the activity costs add up to the cost of the work packages. Work packages are the last level of classification in a work breakdown structure. Work packages costs add up to the control account costs. One or more work packages are aggregated or clubbed together to create a control account and manage the costs of the work packages. Next, the project costs are identified. There can be multiple control accounts in a project. Now, once the project cost is calculated, some reserve is added to take care of any uncertainties. You may have made some assumptions to calculate the cost of the activities, and by adding some reserve, you would want to take care of any of those uncertainties. In this case, make a note that you are accounting for the assumptions made, and it can be said that this reserve takes care of the known uncertainties. This reserve is called the contingency reserve. At this point, you've arrived at the cost baseline, the cost for the project that will be used for budgeting and tracking purposes. Once the planned cost is arrived at, there is another reserve that gets added called the management reserve. Note that the management reserves are not part of the cost baseline, and they're only used during emergencies. By adding the contingency reserve, you've already taken care of the known uncertainties. And by adding the management reserve, you take care of any unknown uncertainties, those risks that perhaps have not yet even been identified. Unknown uncertainties are added based on experience or expert judgment. Now, let's move on to discuss project risk management in the next screen. Project risk management includes the processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, and controlling risk on a project. The key objective of risk management is to increase the probability and/or the impact of positive events and decrease the probability and/or impact of negative events. In the next screen, let's look into a business scenario to understand some of these concepts better. Cynthia is a subject matter expert and the director of new store construction in small markets. As she has expertise and experience in managing complex store construction for the corporation, she's been appointed as the manager of a new large and complex construction project involving a gas station. None of the previous construction projects included a gas station and convenience store component. Since this is a new initiative and a way for the company to diversify its business, this project is critical to the business, and it's very visible to senior management. It could be a career maker or breaker. The senior management team is anxious to see the project brought to life, but the company lacks a strong risk management process. The company would like Cynthia to prepare a risk response plan and submit it prior to the project's first milestone in 3 weeks. What should Cynthia do? As the company lacks a risk management structure and has handled risk poorly in the past, Cynthia should first search internally for risk experts. Internal experts would be knowledgeable of risks that exist within the business as it deals with construction. She would then identify subject matter experts external to the organization who are knowledgeable about risk management as it relates to convenience stores with a gas station component. Another viable resource would be the historical documents around which risk has been calculated previously. This would help point out other stakeholders and subject matter experts who can contribute to the risk response planning process. After the key players are in place, Cynthia can work with them to go through the identification and prioritization process of risk that leads up to the development of their plan.